Hi, Doug.
Hi, Carly, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fine.
Good. Welcome to New Mexico. We're glad that you could make it down for the show.
Well, thank you. I wish I could see your face. I don't know if I was talking to you, but
I know. Well, let's talk about your show, starting with just moving landscape. Why don't you introduce us a little bit to the theme of the show and kind of how that came up for you? I mean, clearly it's directly kind of referencing the movement within the landscape and the way that you're abstracting the landscape to create, this physical movement. But you've also talked a lot about like metaphysical movement and ideas and things like that. So maybe you can just expand on that a little bit, just to give us a little bit of frame of reference for the show.
Sure. Yeah, the title "Moving Landscapes" is sort of a play on the words. That a double meaning. Not only do I want to convey that idea of movement within the paintings, but I also want people to be moved by the landscape, by the paintings themselves, like I'm moved, to making a painting of them, an art object that's representative of those things that move me in the landscape or whatever it may be, still life. But I've been kind of captivated for a long time about that idea of moving through the space of, where we are. If it's moving through as you're walking, as you're just even suddenly being through the space, moving, looking here, moving here, things are constantly shifting. If I'm driving my car down the highway and I'm looking down at the end of the road, but I'm seeing things that are off to the side of my peripheral vision. Those things are still being recorded in my brain and my memory. And in a painting, I can sort of look at those things that were in motion. I can look at them directly. So in a painting like this, where you can see in the foreground that there are elements there that seem to be concrete. They seem to be structures, man-made structures, a fence, a shed, fence posts, something here that's in the foreground, but I can't quite tell what it is when I look at the painting, but I sense what it is because my memory goes back to times when I've driven down the highway and things have flashed in my peripheral vision, whatever they may be. But here I can record them in a concrete way, and they're still. So a moving thing can be still in the painting. The same thing, like in this painting to the right here, where I have things that are relatively more tightly rendered. They seem tighter. They seem more sort of realistic. But as I sort of cross bridges from this area to other areas where it becomes very, very abstract, I feel that's very much the way I see things or I remember things. In a painting, I don't have to paint it like the photograph. I may be using photographic reference, but I can paint it like my mind remembers it, or as my eyes literally see something. If I focus on something up here, and I don't move my eyes to the fore. If I be concentrating here, everything in my peripheral vision is in motion. It's out of focus. It's very abstract. And so in a way, in these paintings, I'm really trying to suggest what really is there or how I really conceive things. So realism isn't necessarily photographic. There are a lot of things that are real that can be in a painting that are real that aren't necessarily tied to the form itself. For example, passage of time, movement through space, sounds that I remember, wind blowing through trees, the shifting that happens when I'm standing here, but I move over here and look at the scene, and it's basically the same thing, the scene, but from a different point of view, or if I'm lower or higher. In a painting, I can put all of those in at once. And even though it's not real like a photograph, it's real like our experience as sort of human beings moving through space. So someone may see this and say, well, it's very abstract. It's just paint on a surface. It doesn't really represent anything. In my mind, it's very, very accurate how it represents the way we truly see things. We tend to think that since everything has very concrete forms in reality, that in a painting they have to convey that concreteness. But I'm trying to convey other aspects of reality, I guess. And that doesn't happen it doesn't happen in every single painting, because I think every painting kind of calls for its own rules. But generally, that's how I sort of view painting and sort of my role as the artist.
And so when you're within your process and starting with maybe a specific place, I know a lot of your inspiration starts with an actual place, maybe in the area where you live or from your travels. And then but it's kind of like a springboard for, then you blend in different observations and memories, and which can reflect time passing. And like you were saying, so at what point do you kind of jump off into that area? I mean, how you start out with an area in mind that you're inspired by. So what's that process like as you kind of open into that more abstract mindset?
Well, I think something has to be the point of departure for the creation of an art object, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a poem or a novel or a dance or a piece of music, whatever it may be, that art form. There has to be a point of departure, and I believe that the most important point of departure is an emotional response to the subject. I think that can lead into a conceptual development that's less emotional and more sort of an intellectual development of the whatever form the art takes. But I really believe that there needs to be an emotional point of departure. And so, that may be, an experience in, something in my hometown in Spring City. I may, look through past my fence into the neighbor's yard and find forms and, passages of light and color that speak to me in an aesthetic way, which is tied to emotion. And so I'll start, developing compositions, the divisions of space where the elements reside within the rectangle I may be using, and place those in a certain way to push the values lighter, push the values darker, more contrast, push the colors brighter, push the colors more towards neutral, in order to get back at that original emotional point that sparked the interest in the image. And then, at that point, it's constantly sort of responding to what happens with the paint and the marks that are in front of me. Since as soon as you put down something on the surface, you have to respond to it. And if there are no surprises for me, there's no surprise for the viewer, as they say. So I like to create I like to enter into the painting mode with a bit of a frame of mind that allows for surprises to happen. So at the beginning of the painting, going from that original emotional response, then into the development of the composition, and then I start mixing up paint and throwing it on the surface, and then start responding to it. That's when the painting can really speak to me, and we create this dialogue where the painting may say, you thought it was going to be this thing, but really it needs to be this other thing. And if I'm wise, I'll listen to what the painting wants. And so then that way I get lots of surprises as an artist, and I can leave my assumptions behind and just start working more intuitively with the painting. I think that can be really beautiful. And in the end, you want to keep that original spark that made you want to do the painting, and that's really difficult to do because you can overthink it, and you can kind of start placing things because you assume that that's what it needs to have to finish the painting, but a lot of times it kills it. So for me, it's a play between working intuitively and working sort of stepping back and seeing the thing objectively as well.
So it's kind of like you're starting with a landscape that inspired you or a place, but then as you start to paint, and you're just kind of more inspired and responding to the shapes and the colors and the form, texture.
Exactly. Once the subject is decided, then what you have left are design principles. You have point, line, plane, value, transitions of value. You have color, transitions of color. You have edges. They can be hard edges or soft edges. You can have patterns. You can have rhythms. You can have motifs that occur through the painting. All of those things are very conscious decisions that you can kind of step back and say, this isn't working. Well, I can revert to these design elements. But in the end, you've started with the subject. I'm going to do a painting of this field with those trees and that piece of architecture, the mountain range behind it. But that isn't what carries the content of the work. That isn't the content of the work isn't the subject of the painting. We're turning that around. The subject isn't really what carries the power of the content. It's about that thing, but the painting is really getting its strength from all of these very abstract things. So the power and content really is in the abstraction in my mind. It's yes, I can read subject. This is a yellow field with kind of a bluish gray mountain range in the distance with some distant hay bales here. That's the subject. But just because I picked a pretty field with hay bales and mountains isn't going to make it a great painting. It's referring to all of these design principles and doing in the proper arrangement that will move me as an artist and hopefully move someone else as a viewer.
And so are the artists you're inspired by, are they landscape painters or are they abstract painters? Because you kind of are both mine.
Both. In fact, the painters that come to mind, some of them are purely abstract. Some of them are, old masters that I have really admired. Some of them are tonalists. Some of them are abstract expressionists. I could refer to to someone like Schwartzman, but at the same time, I could refer to Degas or Velasquez, or Sargent, or someone like that. But what I see in them is this sort of blend of realism and abstraction within their work, and just the way that they arrange forms and arrange their color palette, the kinds of marks that they may make, the edges, like in this painting here, there's for me the surprises to me that happened along the way were these sort of transparent darks against these more opaque lights, and then the transitions within this area from these very cool greens to warm greens to sort of yellowish neutrals down to purples and all that. But within one plane, one shape, there's infinite variety. And then the trick is to unify the painting, so we have absolute unity. But if it's only unified, you're maybe going to be bored. So I look for this infinite variety within the unity of the composition. If it's infinitely varied, it's probably going to be chaotic. So you have to play the unity and variety off of each other. But I think that's what, maybe gives that this strength of composition.
And it looks like those are some more winter scenes that you're bringing in over there, like some
There's a winter scene here, and then this is an autumn painting here. It's this is a painting that sort of rides that really thin edge between absolute abstraction and reality. But if I sort of enter into the rules of this painting and sort of buy into it, I as a viewer can say, that's really what it feels like. That this, even though it's pretty abstract, it's more real. It's suggestive of more reality than if I were to render it out as if it were a photograph. It's more real because emotionally it's more compelling, I guess.
Well, and when you're in a scene like that, if you're in the woods in a beautiful fall day, things that you remember and recall in your memory aren't the exact shapes of the leaves. It's more of like the overall sense of the color and the movement
exactly.
And the day. So that's kind of what I see from that.
In fact, if I remember right, I'm usually not very good at remembering titles, but I think I called this Autumn Memory, and so just conjuring up those memories of the color, the textures, the patterns, all of that. It's definitely more describing a feeling rather than describing the outer form of the things. Yeah.
Well, and so the fact that you brought still life into this show, isn't really too much of a departure, because you're approaching that with kind of the same mindset and technique that you're approaching the landscapes, because it's not as much about the subject necessarily for you. So can you talk about the life?
Yeah. I don't think that I really want to, be pigeonholed as a landscape painter or a still life painter, just a painter. And I'm trying to paint forms. It's getting an emotional or aesthetic response to the subject, and then making a design at that point for a painting. So I can be, just incredibly captivated by the forms of three pairs sitting on a tabletop and the light hitting them. Of course, I know this isn't how it really looks in reality, but it's how it feels in reality, and it is descriptive of how we truly, see things or remember things. But again, it's this idea of going from reality out to pure abstraction within the same same frame. It's interesting to me. But whether or not if it's a landscape or if it's still life or if it's a figure, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to try to create a formula to apply to every single one of those subjects or anything. I just try to be as honest as I can with the compositional response to the subject and the emotion that it inspires. Here, on this painting, it's almost purely abstract until you realize, well, this is a plain of snow that's past all these, foreground weedy things, and there's a hillside that rises up into the mist, and I can see some, cedars and trees, and maybe a tree line here, a tree that's relatively more rendered here. And as soon as I realize those things and I buy into the rules of the painting, I say, that is suggestive of reality, and it's sure it's paint on the surface, but it's also the way I remember things, how I truly see things. If I'm looking into a scene that is brilliantly lit and maybe there's flares of light and halation of light, and I'm squinting and my eyes are watering and the light's hitting them in a particular way, I can't see things too clearly. Well, that's kind of how this this painting is very closely rendering that sensation. It's not rendering the sensation like a camera would see it. It's how my mind and my eyes sees it.
And there was another piece that I saw on the website, that grassy banks, or there was a barn and some trees. Yeah, I was curious about that one because that's an interesting composition. I thought it almost looks like a vintage blurry photograph in a way. So I wondered if that is that a specific place, or was that kind of a combination of places, or what was the inspiration behind that piece?
No, this is a specific place. It's in a village called Colander, Scotland. It's just a beautiful location. I've been a few times. I was really captivated by an emotional response of being in this beautiful place, but also aesthetically, just the forms that were calling out to be organized and painted. I liked the sort of geometry, the repetition of these rectangles within rectangles, triangle with the rectangles, a sort of a sphere that's made with this tree. So we have rectangles and spheres and or circles anyway, and triangles. So there was a lot of kind of geometry that went into dividing up the space. And then, sort of this shaft of color horizontally, another shaft vertically. It was really something that was calling out as, aesthetically, just as a composition that would be really interesting to paint. And, the fuzziness of it is really sort of my way of suggesting that it's sort of relying on memory, and that power of memory that isn't always clear. Memory isn't always clear, but it's powerful. It stays with us. We can't really define it. It's I think memory is one of those sort of metaphysical things, you can't quite put your finger on. And so, these things were painted somewhat loosely, somewhat broadly, in order to get closer to that concept.
I really love that piece. I love how the building there is kind of cropped out. That perspective is like you were saying, the geometry of it, I think it's really
right. It's it's just playing with space, putting things sometimes in awkward places can, I don't know, it sort of raises interest, that's one of the things I really liked about Degas was sometimes you put a figure way out to the left, something else way out to the right, and this awkward play of space and time passage between the two. It's interesting that way.
And when you're traveling, you just seeing everyone else is looking at trees and mountains, and you're seeing lines and forms.
Yeah. Well, they may be looking at the subjects, but I may be looking at dirt or something. Thinking of what are the beautiful colors that make up that dirt. I don't know. But no, I'm usually kind of looking at, like if I'm out in the landscape, I kind of look at the bones of the land, the way, like in this painting, just the way the light breaks across these mountain forms in the distance in this mist, where I like to just call it the basic understructure of the bones of the mountains. So as that's raking across here and light's raking across here, there's not really a lot of rendering of like grass and tree branches and reeds and sticks and rocks and things like that. Those things are suggested, and I think the power of suggestion is maybe a little bit, in my work, it's just more interesting to me than rendering out, exact forms. The implications may be more powerful. So, so looking at these forms, it's really a rectangle with rectangles within it. So there's this sort of rhythm that's made by areas of rectangle, all within the rectangle, and then getting these subtle, this curve. There's this sort of sweep that goes like this through the composition. A pattern of vertical against the horizontals. Plays of light and dark, going dark to light to dark to light to dark across. Those are things that as you saw the painting, but those things don't carry the content in themselves. It's really it's got to be a combination of all these elements that end up in the equation equaling content. So.
And that implication kind of gives the viewer a jumping off point too, to kind of take the piece and interpret it, place their own experience and meaning in it as well.
Exactly. I mean, that's vital to have the viewer continue the experience. And as kind of as human beings, we are really intrigued by the journey, by the problem solving. When there's a mystery in front of us, when things are mysterious, we kind of want to figure it out. Sometimes that's very that can be very daunting to some people. Where that mystery is frightening, scary. not sure what's going on in here. I can't quite see what's there. You know, I'd rather have it spelled out. But for those who enjoy the journey, they enjoy. You know, that's really what, you know, a tangle of you know, grass and twigs and all these trees in the wintertime. It is chaotic, and it's interesting how, you know, that can suggest reality so well. And so the mystery is actually more clear than if I were to render out a stick. The you know, even though you don't know what's there, you feel it's more real. It's interesting how that can be.
Well, are there further pieces in there that you want to see now?
Well, you know, some of these, like this painting here, was and quite a number of the paintings in the show were done where, again, I was looking at these sort of simple divisions of space, these horizontals, angles, verticals, this angle coming back into this, you know, so there's these combination of devices. But it's also one where I said, you know, I want to do a nocturne, I want to do a night painting, but do it high key. I was really intrigued by how Whistler did that. How could he do a night scene and yet have it be high key, you know, a lot of lighter values, mid to light values. So that was my sort of problem around solving this, and to do it in a very limited palette, so, you know, very focused.
Yeah, it does have a much kind of lighter tone of blue than on most of your pieces. Like deeper mountain blue, and that's kind of a lighter tone.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I started probably covered most of them. We've got these stairs over here.
Yeah, I love those stairs.
Would you like a bubbly water or something over here?
This and you know, this painting, this is like built up over, you know, multiple layers. But again, you know, kind of trying to convey the mystery that I feel, you know, when I'm looking at things in the dust or something. Yeah, the pairs is funny. I did this this painting as a demonstration in a workshop, but it was purchased. The demonstration was purchased by one of the participants, and then I thought, I want to do that painting again for real, you know, not just a demo. Although I really liked how that demo turned out. And so I did a second version of it, and it turned out, I thought it was kind of a neat little painting. And my daughter came into the studio and said, "Dad, you never give me any of your paintings. Can I have that one?" She begged and begged. So I said, "Okay, you can have that." So I did. This is version 3.
Round 3.
Yeah, and it was interesting to go into this painting knowing that I had solved some of the things, you know, beforehand in the other in the first two, but then kind of going beyond it into you know, into sort of other realms. You know, we've got these this repetition of these spheres of composition, but I also started seeing this sort of ghost shape as a repetition of this square shape off into space. So there's this sort of almost a spiritual rendering of the pair, where this becomes more real. This becomes more of a symbol of the pair in a different way. So yeah, that was kind of fun.
Well, it looks like you kind of have a full house there, Doug. So I'm going to let you enjoy your.
It's starting to fill up.
Well, enjoy the show, and thanks for chatting with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. It was great to talk to you.
All right, you too.
Yeah.